It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 501 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record, where I hold in-depth conversations with today's leading experts in sales, marketing, and leadership 6 days a week. Join me on the show for episode 501 is Bertrand Hazard. Bertrand is the VP of Marketing at TrustRadius. I'm looking forward to talking with him because TrustRadius is part of a growing set of third-party, independent, crowdsourced review sites for SaaS applications. And these are becoming really important resources for buyers that are evaluating solutions in various markets. And I want to explore how these sites operate and the value that they provide to buyers and sellers alike. So, Bertrand Hazard, welcome to Accelerate.
I'm doing very well, and thank you for having me on your show today, Andy.
Yeah, we were just talking briefly before I started recording the interview that it's sort of a big occasion for you as well as we're recording this, that the French elections are going on, and you get to go vote tomorrow. I find that interesting that there are locations in the U.S. set aside for French citizens to vote. I guess you're into a French language school or something.
Yes, actually a trilingual school.
Trilingual school.
Yeah, my kids have the luxury of actually being trilingual because my wife is actually originally from Peru. So we are a pretty international school, international family.
I guess. So what's the lingua franca at home?
English. We live in the U.S. This is the language of the schoolyard, and that's the language that we speak.
Okay, so when mom gets mad at the kids, is it Spanish?
It's in Spanish. When she gets mad at the husband, it's in Spanish.
Spanish as well. How's your Spanish?
It's good enough, not as good as my English, but good enough that I can understand.
When she's upset, what's she saying? What exactly she's calling you?
She's just like telling me how much she loves me. But she just like me to listen more to what, she'd like her to say.
Yeah. It's one of those language barriers. I'm sure that's the cause of the whole thing. So, well, welcome to the show. And I start off with sort of standard questions I'm asking all my guests these days, which is, in your mind, what is the single biggest challenge that's facing sales reps today?
Interesting one. I think the biggest single challenge for them is to be able to personalize every single conversation that they are having with their prospects.
Okay. So why do we think that's a challenge? Because, I mean, you're talking about all channels of communication, not just, talking on the phone or meeting in person or so on, but
No, what I mean by that, and as you ask me the question, I think what I mean by that is that there is an expectations from the buyers these days that, they want to hear how, whatever, they're looking at, whatever product or solutions they are looking at is actually going to solve their problem. And not just their problem, but their specific use case. So especially in the B2B world where we still, buy technologies, which happens to be, not something, it's not like an iPhone where you just like plug it in and then everybody can enjoy the same benefits or the same features from the iPhone. But it's really a piece of software. It's a big investment. And so they just want to make sure, and their expectations is that, they want to understand that, that piece of software is really going to solve the problem that they are trying to solve. And they also want to understand and make sure that, the company behind that piece of technology is going to be there for them. So I think what's really important from a sales perspective, but also from a marketing perspective, is to be able to, build a trusted relationship with the prospect, and then provide them, that level of information and confidence that, whatever you're selling to them is actually a fit for them, so that, ultimately they're going to be successful with whatever you sold them.
Okay, well, I'm going back to the point you said is personalizing the conversation. What you're saying is really the reps being knowledgeable enough about the products and services they sell, having insights into the customer, their business, and how they would receive value from investing in your product or service. So really, the reps having enough, acumen, capability, whatever we want to label it, to be able to personalize that buying experience.
Yeah, and even more than, of course, they need to understand their product, but it's really about understanding their buyers, right? What's the motivation behind
that's what I said, the customer and their needs and requirements. Yeah. Okay. All right. So if you were to provide one recommendation for a behavior that sales reps could master to personalize the selling process as you talked about, what would that be?
It's probably not going to be revolutionary for you because you do a lot of these interviews, but I think the number one skill that you probably need is listening, and when asking the right questions and listening to what your prospective buyers are telling you. That's really, I think, the number one skill. Now, how do you do that? I mean, one thing that personally I like to do when we do sales trainings is to bring on board or to bring in during the sales training some existing customers, but also prospective customers, and then have them to talk and have conversations with our sales teams, but also with our marketing team. And it's really interesting because we usually then survey the attendees of these trainings, the sales guys, and usually the conversations that we have with the buyers or with the existing customers prove to be the content that they must enjoy during the sales training. It's just a great learning experience. It's always fascinating to me going and looking at companies, and you have people selling, let's say, to VP of marketing that I'm not asking them where necessarily they need to have been a VP of marketing in the past, but truly they don't spend enough time talking to VP of marketings and just trying to understand what's their frame of reference, what's keep them up at night, and how they make buying decisions. And I think it's not just something that sales should rely on, the marketing or product marketing team to do. I think it's part of the job as well for sales to spend a lot of time with buyers and again, sometimes prospective buyers, and just understand the psychology behind it.
Yeah, it seems like one of the real problems though that I encounter and that when I'm looking at sales teams, evaluating sales teams, working with individual contributors, even management people from time to time that I coach, C-level people, is that we go through this process of identifying our ideal client profile and identifying personas and so on. And so what happens then when the sales rep goes in and it's, again, however they're contacting, whether it's phone or in person or whatever, is they ask questions, but they're listening for an answer, not the answer, right? Because they're expecting to hear something. And this is, to me, is one of the real problems we have. Is you brought up listening is really the skill, and I think I call this listening without judgment is really the skill that you need. Because the fact is that you may have a persona identified, you may have a ICP identified, you may have their needs laid out, typically that you find, but people's brains operate as sort of pattern matching machines, and if you give them patterns to match against, they're going to default to that using their confirmation bias, and as a result, may very well miss exactly what the customer's saying that the problem is.
I think you're right. I mean, listening is not easy, right? I mean, it sounds easy because everyone think of it of like, well, I'm just going to switch my ears and I'm going to listen to what someone has to say. But, like exactly what you said, I think you hit the nail when you say, there's one way is to listen in a very objective way, and one way is to just listen and basically thinking, okay, this is what I want to hear. And that's a challenge. And this is why, you don't have, necessarily salespeople. And sometimes you might even use external agencies to do, or external consultant to do win-loss analysis. When we do, brand exercise, you sometimes want to make sure that you've got like a third party driving some of these conversations, because otherwise, everyone, I think, is biased in a way, and they're kind of like, well, this is what this person says, so this is what it means. And the truth is, like, we probably should ask, is this really what you mean? And ask the 5 times why to ultimately come to the core of what people really mean. But that's someone who has that ability. Again, not probably just in sales, but someone who has that ability to really kind of like say, okay, you're saying this, is this really what you mean? But, so in these two scenarios, is it that scenario versus that scenario? If you have the time to do that and you have the ability to do that, I think you can go much quicker to the core of the problem. But most importantly, And I think that's something which is really important. People on the other side of the coin will actually be happy and excited to hear that someone is actually paying attention to what they are saying.
Why am I laughing at that? But I'm laughing because it would seem so obvious to be painful, but it is true. It is absolutely true.
I jokes with some of the sales guys who happens to be younger than me, and I said, you learn a lot when you're married, and one of the things is like you have to learn how to listen and really understand fast sometimes what someone really means, even if they don't necessarily mean the words, or they're not using the words, and what you're hearing through the words is not necessarily what they really mean, and so that listening part is really highly critical, and I think that companies should invest in that.
Yeah, I agree. But I think that I was going to interject is I think that even using an example with your partner, your spouse, is that it's not just paying attention to really listen to what they mean. It's to ask a question to clarify exactly what they mean. And this is a part where so many people miss this part of it is we can do all that quote unquote active listening we want to someone, but if we're not, I don't necessarily know the 5 times why, but there's a version of why that you can ask several times without becoming annoying that helps you get closer to the truth of what's being said. And that's really the job of the salesperson. It's because too often I think this operates on multiple levels. One is salespeople, like I said, they sort of do the pattern matching and follow the path of least resistance in terms of listening for a specific answer. But the other thing is also they take at face value what the prospective buyers or the customers tell them.
Yep.
And you have to be a little skeptical. And sometimes it's the skepticism is driven by the fact that, maybe it's not skepticism, maybe it's just a reluctance to rush in and acknowledge you understand what they're saying, is that, customers are trying things out on you as well. Part of the selling process is through talking with you, they're coming to an understanding of what it is that they need. So you got to ask some questions to surface that, not just say, "Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, let's go to the next question."
To your point, there's 2 thoughts that comes to mind. One is, honestly, I don't believe this is just something that sales should be doing. It's something that, if you think about the full life cycles and how companies are organized, but something that, product marketers have to do because they are supposed to understand the buyers in the early day, in the early phase, which means like if they really pay attention and ask the right questions and do really listen, they will actually craft some better message, which ultimately will help the salespeople. Because we all know that. Sometimes it's you get a lot of people who come in and then the sales guys start to talk to them and they realize that there's a disconnect between what they can sell and what the person came in the first place, and it's a waste for everybody. The second thing I was going to say, and maybe that's a tactic that personally I use when I do have conversations with customers, but even prospective buyers or closed lost. I've run a few recently. It's to actually replay what people are saying, and I almost kind of like play a little bit of just to make sure that I understand what you said. I believe that what you said was this, and this. Am I correct? And I found that this is extremely useful because, one, there's a validation, but it's also lead to even more information because, again, that person on the is really starting to say, "Oh, that's interesting. Today I've got someone who is actually trying to listen to me as opposed to selling me something." And it's amazing the amount of information you can extract from that, but also make sure that you've got a good summary of that conversation that you can replay then later, via emails or via other form of communications.
Yeah, that technique I think is very valuable. Some people call it mirroring technique, or mirror back to the people what they said. Yeah, it's another good form of question. It doesn't necessarily dig down a different level, but you would then confirm what you think you heard. And the customer then has a chance to say, well, yeah, maybe I didn't express that as clearly as I wanted. If that's what you heard, let me try again. And I've had that happen to me many times and use that technique you talk about specifically. And it is very powerful because oftentimes customers, I said, they sort of inelegantly expressed what it was they were trying to say. or the point they're trying to get across. And yeah, given a second chance, said, no, I can be much more clear now. Perfect, right? Because now you haven't left with a misunderstanding of what it is exactly they're trying to achieve.
Exactly.
Okay, so we were talking a little bit before the show about TrustRadius and what you do, and I want to give you a chance to tell the listeners what TrustRadius does, and then we're having a conversation really about how it has an impact on how companies market these days and connect with customers. So fill us in a little about TrustRadius. What's the mission? What's the vision? And start there, and we'll jump in.
Well, so most of the people know TrustRadius as being a review platform for technology products. So what I mean by that is that we are helping technology buyers to make more informed decisions with authentic, in-depth user insights, basically content from their peers and content that they can trust. Now, what we are doing for technology vendors is a lot more than that. What we're helping technology vendors is really to get their customers on the record authentically and at scale, and then use that content to engage and convert their buyers across their own sales and marketing channels. So it's not just about capturing reviews and having reviews posted on TrustRadius. The site is really a mean to an end. What it is, it's really about saying, okay, I've got a customer base of, let's say, 1,000 customers. And what I want to get as many of these customers on the record so that I can do a few things with it. I can understand use cases that maybe I'm not aware of. And that's usually extremely powerful from a product direction, product strategy standpoint. I want to listen to how customers speak about my product. And that's really useful and extremely important for both product marketers, but also for salespeople, because now you can kind of like start to see about how people describe you and describe your products and features in a way that then you can, replicate with prospective buyers. And then it's important for marketers that can use now the voice of their customers as a way to nurture nurture the prospects that they are engaging with. And then for sales, which is the most important, they've got now at the tip of their hands the ability to provide examples, what I love to say money quotes from existing customers that they can share with their prospects. And instead of saying, well, look, trust me, I'm telling you that we can do this and this, they can basically point to a specific quote within a review and say that, don't trust me, don't take my word, look at what John at this company is telling about, our product and services and offerings. So that's in a nutshell what, TrustRadius is all about. We are, we want to bring really transparency to how people buy software, but we're also trying to help, vendors to take advantage of their customers and do it at scale. That's in a nutshell what we're doing.
Okay. So how are you working with vendors to do that?
So with vendors, any vendor today can come to TrustRadius and they can have their product listed. And if they want, they can even have, drive their customers to write reviews on TrustRadius. There's a standard template that they can use to do that. And it's completely free. So it's not a pay-per-play. We don't like that model of pay-per-play. Now, for other vendors, what we're doing is we're working with them and we're helping them to really not go from 0 to 10 reviews, but 0 to 100 reviews. We're really working with them to get a lot more of their customers on the record because we know how to run programs to do that. And we can also customize the questions within the reviews, which means that if you start with the end in mind, if you start to think about, okay, what would help us to sell or what's stopping us from selling? Let's say you work for a company and you know that your product is highly scalable, but there is perception in the market that your product is not, necessarily scalable. What we can do is we can insert questions at the front end, basically within the review, and ask existing customers to speak specifically around scalability. So what it does is not only you're getting new brands on the record, but you're also getting your customers to speak, genuinely and authentically about, your features that might differentiate you or help you in your sales process. And then once you've got that content, that's gold, because now that content can be reused, as part of your sales engagement.
So if everything is free, so what's your business model?
The free part is someone who is just basically listed their product on their site and then driving reviews. The paid model, the paid part, is when we actually run the programs on behalf of the vendors to get their customers on the record. And also what we do is we actually have tools in the backend that allow them to tag all the reviews, tag all the quotes from the reviews, and then we have tools that push that content dynamically and contextually to either their web pages or to their Salesforce instance with their favorite CRM product.
Got it. Okay. So when you're helping them drive reviews, you're helping them drive reviews to TrustRadius.
Yes.
Okay. Got it. Okay. All right. Well, that makes sense, because as I was going through the site and looking at what you guys are doing, it's like, okay, everything's free here. There has to be a paid model somewhere. All right. So that makes sense. So who's typically, the ideal client for you guys?
Well, if I look at the roster of customers that we have, we work with, anyone from very large corporations like, the Oracle, IBM, TIBCO of the world, through, companies like Marketo, all the way to much smaller organizations like, a company here in town called Trendkite. Really, it's less about, the size of the company. It's really about working with companies that really want to put their customers in the front hand and ultimately, use their customers as the voice of the company. So that's typically who we work with. We usually will work with marketing departments, and dealing with usually the CMO and VP marketing, who we engage with. But we also work with the usually VP of sales who are interested in the content that we can put right in the hands of their sales reps. So there's like any sale, there are people who are influencers and there are people who are decision makers. But the key people we work with are usually the CMOs and VP of marketing of companies.
So, looking at what you're doing, I mean, it calls to mind, and you and I spoke about this a little bit, said before we came on the air, about how companies now are coming to the realization that the value of the voice of the customer, the value of social proof through customer test, reviews and so on, is only increasing. And the value of the brand, actually, in a relative sense, in terms of the role it plays in the customer purchase decision, is decreasing. Mm-hmm. Gosh, a book I refer to quite often called Absolute Value. I don't know if you've read that book by Simonson and Rosen, where they talk about this as through their research, says that customers more than ever have the ability to sort of know beforehand what the derived value from a product is going to be, or the user experience is going to be before they even buy it. Mm-hmm. Thus, brand becomes less important.
But I think it's scary, but it's also an opportunity, right? And what I mean by that, it's scary because, again, in the B2B space, and I was, before working for TrustRadius, I've had multiple product marketing and marketing roles for technology software companies. So I come from that world. But people used to be very much in control of their message, and the sales process was pretty linear. So it's scary to think like, whatever. Now people are actually getting to learn about our product and then basically develop an opinion before we even engage with them. That's the scary part. But the truth is, like, when you bring it back to people and say, well, let me ask you, how did you pick your hotel? You went on vacations. Where did you go to pick and select your hotel? Oh, I went on TripAdvisor. Okay. Where did you go to, when you go to Amazon? I mean, what do you look at to make a product?
The world falls into two categories. You either go look at TripAdvisor, everything else in the world is on Amazon.
Well, and so the funny bit, it's like people are like, well, of course. And then even when you tell them and say, because there was always the worry from people and from companies saying, but what if I don't get as great of a review? And, in our case, our reviews are about 400 words. So if someone wants to really say something negative about a product, it's usually down to the fact that they were sold a product that didn't fit their use case. So it's not like we have just people complaining for the sake of complaining. That's not a good site for that experience. We really focus more about like, very positive, and or people who truly can explain how they've been using the product. But the point is, like, if you tell them and say, well, when was the last time you actually went to buy a TV and you bought the TV, you bought a TV that only had like a 5-star rating, and the answer is like, well, no, if it's too good to be true, I don't believe it, I don't trust it. So the thing is, when you bring back to people and say, well, as a consumer, this is how you behave. Well, the reality is like B2B buyers are also consumers in the same way. And they're behaving and they're doing exactly the same thing. They go to their peers first. This is they just want to hear. I mean, let's be honest. We live in a world where trust is really a problem. I mean, people don't trust each other. I mean, just look at the political situations. I mean, nobody trusts, the politicians. There's now the concern about like, can I trust the news that I've got, that I'm receiving? And so what people are doing and what they've been doing on the consumer side, but they're doing on the B2B side exactly the same way. They basically, validate. They either go to their peers first, or they validate with their peers the claims that the vendors are making. It doesn't mean that the vendors does not have a role to play. That's the key thing. I mean, in the B2B space, software is still being sold, not just bought. I think that's an important thing. Now, why do I talk about an opportunity? And maybe because I'm a bit of a positive guy. But let's say I've got 20 sales reps and I've got 300 customers. But what if I could get 150 customers speaking on my behalf and sharing what they like about my product and what they think, some of the great things about it, and maybe some of the areas they would love to see that company, my company, kind of like work on, so that they could even do some even greater things. What if I had 150 customers plus 20 sales rep, as opposed to 20 sales reps selling for me? When you start to think like this, I think people start to realize and say, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So then the next issue is like typical of, but it's hard, and it's true. It's really hard to get customers on the record, and it's been really hard. I mean, I took a job once, and the CEO of a company told me, we have 2 case studies. And I told him, well, they're actually poor and outdated. And he said, that's the problem. And he said, I want you to, be able to get us, 40 customers out of 200 on the record. It took me 2.5 years. Now, this was before, buyers and customers were willing to go on the record in social, different social platform. But what we found out, and this was a big epiphany for us, is that actually customers and even from large, big corporations are willing to go on the record and using reviews and review sites mechanisms to do that.
Well, I was going to ask a question because something you said sort of triggered a thought. And so, yeah, we do have this whole issue of politicians trying to manufacture this idea that all news is fake news except the news that agrees with them. But part of what the discussion we've seen, during that same period of time is that to the same degree that the news is sort of manufactured on a social level, that we're seeing this incredible increase in quote unquote fake news in social media.
Yeah.
And so, that supposedly are our peers. So I guess just sort of thinking off the top of my head here is are we going to run into a situation here where, I'm not saying it's an immediate issue, but one of the concerns being is that, we start invalidating mentally to some degree the social proof that comes from user reviews and so on, because, we're all skeptical of everything that's out there at this point. And it, communicates from the consumer space, the social space, into the B2B space. And so they say, well, obviously those can't be trusted.
Well, I think it depends in which format, right? So if it's if it's, one of the things, and I think it's on the B2C side, if you think about the review world, there's been more of an issue about fraud. It's much less of an issue on the B2B world. And the reason is because sites like our platform like TrustRadius, first, to be able to write a review, you need to sign up with a LinkedIn profile. So you have to be authenticated. In our case, we have a human being, a research person, who actually, will validate the person and look at whether, they work for the vendor, they have worked for a competitor, or they work for a competitor, or maybe even have worked for a competitor in the past. And we also, in our case, have people writing reviews which are about 400 words, which, when you ask about the pros, the cons, and some of the use cases that they had and what they like about the product, if you only had one review, you could say, okay, someone could fake it. But the point is, when you start to have 10, 20, hundreds of reviews of one product, you can start to see patterns, right? And it's easy to identify. And in fact, we are rejecting, anywhere between 8 and 15% of the reviews that are being submitted on TrustRadius, every year, just because we want to keep the high quality and we want to make the site very trustworthy. So, and we have someone, again, who basically look at every reviews before publishing it. So I think, what we've done, and I think some of the thought leadership we had in that space and some other sites kind of like doing very similar things, it's protecting against that. The most important is when people come to a site like TrustRadius is again the fact that, one, they can see that this is someone real. They can actually click on their profile. They can learn more about that person. They can even go and check on LinkedIn and make sure this is the right person, because obviously all the information comes from LinkedIn. And also they see the depth of content, and the depth of content very quickly will tell you if it's, it's easy to say something, for instance, like I love product A, if all you have is I love product A. But when you really have like 400 words on average, I mean, you can't fake it as much. And again, we've put in place some very strong process. But to your point, will people ultimately disqualify? I think they will still always trust their peers. So I mean, it's reviews online, but there's also, they also might validate on a face-to-face conversations with other people.
Sure.
But it's true. I mean, it's ultimately, what this is where for us, our mission is really to make it the most trusted, platform, most trusted third-party independent site that exists out there. And this is why we refuse to basically have ads or to, do any kind of like weird manipulation where, a vendor might show up more than another vendor because they would pay us to basically drive leads. We don't like that. We want people to come to the site, ultimately get the information that they need, and we don't convert them into leads. And this was not an easy decision, honestly, from a business perspective, because this is how every other site was operating and still operating. But we decided that, we were more on a mission, and that there were some other ways and better value that we could do. Now, do people... it's the other side, the flip side of what you're saying is also from a vendor perspective. I remember working for a company, and I won't tell you the name, but working for a company that actually drove their own reviews and built their own reviews on the site. And they were actually reviews from their real users.
Sure.
And they did some tests, and their audience in the IT space actually didn't trust these reviews because they could not see where was the source from these reviews. So that's also how important it is to have for us and operate like a third-party independent review site. Is because when people go to a vendor site, for instance, and they see like reviews from TrustRadius, they can click on them, they can come to the site, they actually see that these are real reviews on a third-party site, and that it's not everything perfect. And that's what makes then the content on that page of the vendor site, more credible. The same as like for the sales reps, when some customers of us have the integration into Salesforce, and then when they are basically taking some quotes, sending them into an email, copy paste, send it into an email to one of their prospects. The prospect receives the email. They can see the face of the person if the person has given us the right to use their face, but they still can click to the review, and it brings them back to TrustRadius. Okay. So I think we're doing. We're trying to do it in a way that, yes, the vendors can leverage that content, but they still need to put the link back to the reviews, because it's obviously in their benefit, and ultimately it's just making sure that their buyers don't just think like, oh, they've just created this quote, and that's not a real quote.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it at that for now because we've reached the end of our time, but we'll definitely have you come back on. We'll talk more about TrustRadius and what you guys are doing. And so in the meantime, tell people how they can learn more about TrustRadius and connect with you.
They can come to our site, www.trustradius.com, and if they work for a vendor, they can actually look at the 4 vendors on the top menu bar, and they can learn more about the services offerings that we do we offer, or they can connect with me directly at Bertrand at TrustRadius.com, or they can also look me up on Twitter at Product Marketer. That's the hashtag.
Oh, really? Okay. Excellent. All right. Well, Bertrand, thanks for coming on the show today. And like I said, we'll definitely have you back on. Maybe talk some soccer the next time. We really didn't get a chance to talk about that. Mainly because you made me swear to promise that I wouldn't bring it up at this time, but no guarantees next time.
Well, we'll do it when the French team wins the next World Cup, and maybe in the meantime we'll talk about sales and marketing alignment, some of my great topics I love to talk about as well. But I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, Andy.
Well, I was going to say, how are the French doing in qualifying?
They're doing okay.
Okay.
I'm confident.
You're confident, yeah. Just like me and the U.S. team, we're confident. Okay, all right. We'll talk
both these days. That's the thing about having both a French, citizenship and also a U.S. citizenship. We got now our brain to split. The left side maybe for France, the right side for the U.S.
Well, hey, the U.S. may win it for the first time before France wins it again.
Why not?
Why not? Anything's possible. All right, Bertrand, thank you very much for joining me. Friends, thank you for spending the time with me today. Please join me again tomorrow and every day on Accelerate. We have great content for you 7 days a week. And before then, really appreciate it. You go to iTunes, subscribe to Accelerate, or do it on the podcast app on your phone. Leave a review. We want to hear from you. Leave a review, the topic of the day here on the show. That's an independent site you can go to at iTunes. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.